Okay, and welcome, week 4. And this week we are going to take a look at forms. So if you could, download the zip file, which contains a number of files and other kind of useful things that we're going to use this week. So I've already downloaded them here onto my desktop. It's called lessonfilestart.zip. So just extract that and throw the zip in the trash, particularly Windows users, if you would. The temptation is you can actually open and edit those files, even though they're compressed, and that results in some pretty interesting file corruption. So extract the files and then throw the zip away. So now we have a lesson file start folder, and inside there's a CSS folder with a style sheet, styles.css. There's some images we're going to make use of. There's an index page, JavaScript, a JS page with a little piece of JavaScript, and another file called processform.php. So if we're going to then head over to our code editor, I've got Atom open here. You can use whatever one you want, but with a lot of them, you can add a folder or a project folder or workspace or specify a directory from which you can start, work from as your kind of home base. So I'm going to go to my desktop and select the lesson file start folder here, and this will give me my files here all neat and tidy in a little navigation menu to the left. We're going to start with index.html. So I'll have you open this up here. I'll boost the font size just a bit. That's great. Just make sure my word wrap is on. That's terrific. Now what we're going to do is we're going to open this up in a browser. So I'll open up Google Chrome here is fine. And so we'll go Command or Control O for open, and browse to the index page using, I'll get to my through my desktop here, and that's the one I want, index.html. Open up that. You should see kind of just a basic, it looks like a kind of a web form, but it looks kind of slightly broken, and that's fine. We're going to take care of that. So follow along with me then, and we'll look at this document, and we'll create an interactive form. After we've done that, we're going to change the nature of this form so that it can do some interesting things for us, and then we are going to also use it to capture some of this form data on the server and do something interesting with it. So follow along with me then. So first we're going to look at the form template. So there's a few things that have been pre-built for you. That's okay, but suffice it to say you have an HTML and a body element here. So we have the HTML, the body, the head section like you're familiar with. Inside the head section we have a useful title. So we're going to pretend that this form is for a company called PayDude, that whereby you can log in and add various kind of payment information. It's kind of a payment gateway service. So that this we're going to pretend that this is you're editing a page on this application to allow users to edit their payment information, some of their personal information as well. So the title reflects that. We've got a meta charset UTF-8. We've defined the base language on the HTML with the lang attribute, our doc type, and all that kind of good stuff. So we'll move right into the body of the page here. We have a header element, and this just contains a primary heading for the page, which is the branding, and then a search form. We won't deal with the search form too much. We're going to go into the main part of the document, where we have another heading, a subheading, edit payment information. So the first thing we want to do here is put together a form object, and the form element, very simply, is form. However, it needs at least a couple of things to get it to work properly. The first thing is it needs is something called an action attribute, and the action attribute points to a URL or a file with an absolute or a relative path, whereby when the visitor fills in the form and hits submit or go, all of the data that you've collected from the visitor is then submitted or passed to a certain file for processing. In this case, we're going to send it to this form, file over here called process-form.php. So we'll say process-form.php, and we'll get into why I would add this extension here rather than HTML a little later. That's great. So the next attribute that I'd like is what's called the method attribute. So we go type method, and the method will be equal to, in this case, we'll use get. We can use, and this is kind of how the form data is going to be pushed across the internet to the receiving script. Okay, so we're going to use method equal get. So we've opened a form tag, and then we need to close this. So to do that, we'll scroll all the way to the bottom of the page here, and just before we finish with the main, we'll end of form right here about line 128. So that's where we will close the form. So anything, all of the content inside this start and end form tag, when the user hits the submit button, all of those controls or those elements will be used to capture data. So back up here. So now we're going to hand over to, that's step 1. Step 2A. So 2 I'm going to break into 2 parts. We're going to build an input element and a label element to capture the person's first name. So just in between these 2 div tags, I'm just using the div tags to create a division whereby I can surround or encapsulate the label and the input element. So I'll start with the label first of all, and the label element is built to affix a label, a readable label to the input, offering some amount of direction for the user. There you go. So that's great. And then in order to allow them to type their first name, we need to provide them with an input element. So the input element looks like this. We also need to include a type. So the input element, as we will see later, is a widget that allows us to generate different types of user input. This, in this case, will be text, which is the default. The other thing we need here is we need, since we're capturing a piece of data, I need to associate a variable name to that data. In this case, we'll say F capital name will be the variable name. Then we'll give it an ID equal, and I can give it the same. I can give it the same ID as the name. Now the ID, in order to associate this label with this input element, I want to use the ID value here, and I go back to the start tag of the label, and I type a for attribute, for equal, and this should be also F capital name. So the for attribute actually it associates the label with the associated input control through this relationship here. So that's very important for accessibility. The ID, then we also want an ID. We can add a size attribute, right? And we can basically say, how many characters wide do we want this input, this text box to be? So I'll just put it 25, for example. The other thing that might be helpful sometimes is to put something called a placeholder, and this is so this is some sort of instruction that we can provide for the end user. And then I'll close the input element as such. So we've added, as highlighted, the label, which is for the input, attached with the ID and the for attributes and values, and then the input for that. So save that file save, and we'll go and refresh the page. And you'll see up here, there's our, I'll zoom this up just a bit. There's our first name, and there's the type first name here. That's the placeholder, which goes away as soon as we type into the box. The interesting thing also is if you look, when I click on the input, you'll see it has a blue, or depending on your operating system, maybe orange or some sort of other visual indicator that this form field has focus. So that's when we can now type in the box. The other thing is, because this input here is associated with this form control, if I click on first name, that sends the focus to the associated form control, which is this input box. Pretty cool. That's great. So step 2B, we'll use the above as a template here. So copy these two lines here. And we'll use these to build in a label and input for last name. So paste those in here, and we'll do a couple things. First, we'll change the F name to L name in the label. Of course, if the 4 types to L name here, I have to change the associated ID down here, L name. Notice that's a lowercase L. And then the input type equal text. The name is the variable name. When they type this, will be L name. Size is 25, that's fine. Type and type last name here. So make those changes as highlighted here in the second pair of division div tags. Save the file and reload the page. And you can see again, now we have a placeholder. Last name is there, McCrindle, and so also when you click on this label here, the focus should be applied to the associated form control for the last name, right? Like so. And it's the same with first name, last name, or the focus is applied when you click in the field directly. Terrific. So that is, those are simple text input elements. Awesome. So let's go to step 3 down here. We're going to create label and input pairs below for phone, email, and password. So there are different types of input elements, and each one of these have some different attributes that we will use to indicate what they are. So let's, first of all, in the first div here, we're going to create a field for a phone number inside the div. So first we'll create a label, of course, for equal, and I'll say phone, and close the label element out, and then we'll build the associated input control. So input, and then instead of type equal text, in this case, the type is equal to TEL for telephone. Okay, and we're going to add the name attribute. So the name in this case is the variable name that will be sent to the server once they type something in here. The ID, this allows us to associate this input with the label. It's also useful, the ID is also useful for JavaScript if we want to do any kind of client-side validation, and the phone, and then we want to give, we could do a max, we could do a length, but we're not going to right now. We'll just keep it really simple, so we'll just do that. Okay, so make sure your code matches what's highlighted there. I'll save, and I'll refresh the page, and there we can type phone. So they can type a phone number in there. They're still able to type letters in there, which is unfortunate, but that's something that we could leave to what's called form validation to make sure that they can only type in what we want. Great. So the other thing about adding, you could use a text element for the phone, but by adding type equal tel, you know, when you go into the mobile, so over here, I'll right click and hit inspect on the page, and then I can change this to the mobile view by hitting, depending on what browser you're using. I'm using Chrome. You can click this, and it's a little tiny, obviously, but pull the bigger screen up. If you click the phone field here, oh no, it doesn't. It won't simulate that. But on a telephone, what would happen is if that's type equal tel on a real phone, the number pad would come up rather than the allowing you to type in there. So there's always some useful, helpful accessibility features when you use the right input. So the next one is we're going to do an email. So we'll use. Let's go over here and we'll put label. Got to spell it right. For equal email. And the input type equal email, you guessed it, and the name of this one will of course be email, and the ID will also be email, which ties this to the label. And then input is an empty element, so we put the end of character inside the start tag, unlike label, which is a paired element, which has an end tag. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So that's great. So the last one here we'll add is a password. So imagine you have to create a form where they enter a password. So obviously a label for equal password. Whoops, I don't want the cap. Password. And the ID. That's terrific. And so make sure inside this div here, this pair of div tags, you have the following typed up. I'll say don't be afraid to use the pause button on this video, as if if I'm typing a little quick, not to worry. And then so we'll head over here. We'll reload the page. And you'll look and you'll notice with the password field that the characters are masked, which is kind of interesting. Right? So that obviously we don't want people looking over your shoulder and being mindful of what you're typing in password. So the labels should work. Click on the labels, and the associated form controls should light up or gain focus. And there you go. Terrific. So so that is step 3. We'll take a quick breather here. Allow you to catch your breath, and we'll come back and continue on building out this really cool form.